You can observe two distinct states of human agency. One is active, like a stream carving its own geometry into the landscape. The other is passive, a static block that merely registers the reality handed to it, incapable of initiating change. When we encounter passivity in schools or workplaces, the standard response is an informational intervention. We give motivational speeches, clarify goals, or demand harder work. These tactics almost universally fail because information only addresses the surface level of attention. Passivity is a structural collapse across four distinct psychological dimensions, occurring simultaneously. Authoritarian pedagogy and contradictory corporate cultures cultivate this state. They systematically disconnect an individual's focus from their own goals, punish emotional expression, and penalize initiative. Under this sustained pressure, the individual's internal belief in their own agency disappears, leaving them unable to modify the configurations of their environment. Recognizing passivity as a systemic failure is the only path forward. Treating it as a simple lack of willpower or drive is like trying to push a car while the parking brake is fully engaged. An individual's capacity to act, their belief, is the multiplied product of four variables: focus, emotional coherence, internal consistency, and past successes. Because they are multiplied, if a toxic environment zeroes out even a single dimension, the entire output of your personal agency collapses. In aerospace engineering, this is called gimbal lock. When a 3-axis gyroscope loses a single degree of freedom, the remaining axes cannot compensate. As a result, the entire ship loses its controllability. We see this clearly when the variable of empirical reinforcement is erased. When past efforts are consistently punished, accumulated experience loses its value. Martin Seligman documented this precise scenario as learned helplessness, a state where an organism refuses to attempt escape, even when a path becomes available. Once the system is in this locked configuration, the probability of the individual constituting any new, creative event drops to zero. Thawing this psychological freeze requires a coordinated intervention across all four locked axes at the same time. The process of reversing this collapse relies on the activation operator. This is a targeted protocol designed to repair each variable and artificially elevate the overall belief score. The sequence begins by repairing focus. Through mindfulness practices and isolation from constant external demands, the individual reclaims the capacity to direct their own attention toward chosen goals. The second operation rebuilds emotional coherence. Years of mechanical action sever the connection between what a person physically experiences and what they desire. Restoring this link requires precise physiological pacing. This calendar, detailing a 4-day work week, illustrates the biological rhythm necessary for that coherence. Data shows the optimal ratio of activity to recovery is roughly 62 to 38. Adhering to this golden ratio in breathing and work cycles activates the parasympathetic nervous system, reducing cortisol by up to 25%. By stabilizing focus and biological rhythm, the protocol creates the bandwidth required to dismantle deeper cognitive contradictions. The third operation targets internal consistency by reducing the entropy of doubt. This involves establishing psychological safety and testing internal anxieties against objective reality to see if they hold up. Environments that treat errors as a stigma keep the observer in a state of paralysis, as they are forced to constantly second-guess their own values. Finally, the protocol repairs the success variable. It does this by structuring a series of guaranteed small wins that gradually increase in difficulty, building a record of successful event constitution. Systematic gratitude acts as a psychological rewrite. It forces the brain to reinterpret a history of failures as an accumulation of resources, discoverable and ready for use. Applying these four interventions within a single time window creates a compounding effect. As focus, rhythm, consistency, and success grow symmetrically, the mathematical value of belief begins to rise. While the mind is unfreezing, it still requires external effort to avoid slipping back into decay. This must continue until the system reaches a specific tipping point. There is a precise numerical boundary separating the passive registrar from the active creator. This threshold is known as B crit. Below this threshold, the mind is in a state of decay. The noise of a toxic environment constantly pulls the individual back toward passivity, requiring immense willpower just to remain stationary. But once the compounding variables cross the B-crit threshold, a phase transition occurs. The governing equation of the mind flips from decay to self-reinforcement. At this point, external motivation is no longer needed. The system becomes self-sustaining. Generating an event produces belief, which in turn fuels the constitution of more ambitious events. Passing this tipping point alters the brain's processing speed. Observers demonstrate productivity gains of up to 500%, while the perception of subjective time begins to slow down. This presentation slide displays statistical regressions correlating happiness with flow conditions. In this self-sustaining state, work becomes effortless, reflecting the ultimate break from psychological gimbal lock. Achieving flow is the primary empirical indicator that the observer has moved beyond the zone of passivity. This activation then scales outward. When a newly activated, coherent observer interacts with a passive community, they begin to influence the group's alignment. This is the mechanism of cascading mentorship. The active observer provides a coherence template for others, temporarily acting as an external operator who provides the focus and emotional confidence that the learners have not yet internalized. This creates a recursive loop. One individual's agency raises the coherence of the group, which in turn accelerates further phase transitions in their peers. Mapping these variables allows us to treat creative agency as an engineered, measurable state. Crossing the threshold into self-reinforcement changes our role in the system. We cease being witnesses to the configurations around us, and we begin to independently constitute them.